Dear Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, distinguished participants, my name is Eka Gvalia, and I'm leading cross-border capacity building program at Danish Refugee Council Ukraine office. I would like to share a few technical points before we proceed with the formal agenda of the conference. As you all know, this event is set up as a webinar, and you can only see the panelists. Therefore, I would like to kindly ask all the speakers to leave their cameras on during the full duration of the respective sessions. The working languages of the conference will be Ukrainian and English, and you can access the interpretation through the interpretation icon on the bottom of your screen by clicking the languages of your choice. And last but not least, we will not have the formal question and answer session. However, we would like to strongly encourage you to leave your comments and questions in the chat box. Please, please don't forget to leave your names and affiliations, and we will make sure to follow all your questions after the conference. Today, I have the pleasure to moderate the conference entitled Looking Forward, Integration for IDPs in Ukraine, Challenges and Perspectives for the State Monitoring Integration of System of IDPs in Ukraine, which is co-hosted by the Danish Refugee Council and the Ministry for Reintegration of Temporarily Occupied Territories of Ukraine, thanks to the generous support of American people through the United States Agency for International Development. This conference is organized under the project IDPs Integration Support Initiative in Ukraine, and the primary objective of this project is to enhance the capacity of the Ministry for Reintegration to lead the evidence-based policy planning towards the integration of IDPs. And now I would like to welcome and invite Mr. Brio Lemerle, Country Director of Danish Refugee Council Ukraine. Brio, over to you.
Thank you, Eka. Dear Deputy Minister Seth Khaliliev, dear panelists, dear participants, and dear colleagues. Thanks to all of you for your participation in this national conference today. The integration of internally displaced persons, or IDPs, as they are called, is a complex issue with many different dimensions. It requires a deep analysis and understanding of the difficulties faced by IDPs in order to formulate appropriate solutions and policies. We recognize that the government of Ukraine has taken action in this regard over the past years. The national strategy of IDPs integration and implementation of durable solutions to internal displacement 2017-2020 has allowed the introduction of many initiatives. However, there is work ahead, and critical efforts are needed to provide IDPs with long-term perspective to rebuild their lives. Promoting and supporting durable solutions for IDPs, for refugees, and for people affected by conflicts and crises is an essential part of the Danish Refugee Council's interventions around the world. In Ukraine, we have built on our multi-sectoral programs implemented in Donbass since 2014 and brought our global expertise to strengthen the capacities of the government of Ukraine and relevant stakeholders to help them shape durable solutions. We have worked with the Ministry of Reintegration of the Temporarily Occupied Territories by looking at best international practices, by taking relevant examples from other contexts, and through experience sharing, and by formulating recommendations for policymaking and implementation. I would like to thank the Ministry of Reintegration of the Temporarily Occupied Territories for their active collaboration with our teams over the years. Today's conference will focus on a specific dimension, the implementation of a state monitoring mechanism to measure the integration of IDPs in Ukraine. What are the criteria that should be taken into consideration when measuring local integration of IDPs? Which mechanisms should be used and which state agencies should be involved? What are the current challenges? And most importantly, how do IDPs themselves perceive integration? What does it mean for them? To answer these questions and many others, we will present today the findings and recommendations drawn from recent desk research and analysis, as well as consultation with key stakeholders, with IDPs, and with their host communities. The panelists who graciously accepted our invitation will bring their significant expertise to our discussions. I would like to thank USAID for their valuable support to the efforts of the Danish Refugee Council. This support has made this conference possible, and we are grateful for this. Also, our gratitude goes to the Joint IDP Profiling Service for their collaboration and for the important role they play in this program. Lastly, let me congratulate the team of our cross-border capacity building program, who have worked very hard to produce the findings and recommendations that will be presented to you in a few minutes, and to organize this conference. I wish you all fruitful and productive discussions today. Thank you.
Thank you, Bru. I would also like to join you in extending our gratitude to the Ministry for Reintegration of Temporarily Occupied Territories of Ukraine for very close and effective collaboration. And now I would like to invite Deputy Minister, Mr. Snaver Said Khalilev, for the opening remarks. Please, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much.
Dear friends, hello. I would like to begin with expressing my gratitude to the organizers, to all the partners and all the participants online and offline for their ongoing attention to such important issues as internal displacement, integration of IDPs, and also the issues of reintegration of our citizens and temporarily occupied territories. These issues are highly important and sensitive for our government. Therefore, the dialogue between all the stakeholders, central and local authorities, also the public and international organizations, is very important for us to find effective solutions. We know, and it is proved by analytics in the national system of IDP situation monitoring, that the process of internal displacement, as a rule, is a long-term one, and for the majority of people in this category, it takes years. So we have to develop and focus on long-term durable solutions. And in this regard, the analytics and the results of research, as well as international experience and best practices, will be very useful for us to develop and introduce regulations for integration of the internally displaced persons, and to create systems for quality assessment, needs assessment. I know a lot has been done in this regard, and the work is ongoing, and we need to focus on such approaches. Our ministry fully support such approaches. We know that a mechanism that can be used for this purpose is the system for monitoring of IDPs, which needs to contain the available information, and also it needs to record the housing, educational, healthcare needs of our citizens. And this tool can be used. And our ministry is discussing with the partners and the Ministry of Digital Transformation the possibility of using this monitoring system in order to tackle those issues. You know that our ministry, together with the Ministry of Digital Transformation and the Ministry of Social Policy, has introduced the e-certificate of IDPs, and about 4% of the DIA application are already using it. we have a separate track for digital transformation for IDPs. And within this track, we have e-certificate. We are also working to introduce the possibility to apply online for a financial compensation. Also, one more project that is soon going to be implemented is getting the e-certificate, remote authentication, and other numerous projects. So our ministry and me personally see a big potential in such digital tools in order to increase the effectiveness of IDP integration. And thus, I'm sure we will have a fruitful and useful discussion that will contribute to this process, and I wish everyone fruitful discussion. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Deputy Minister, for the opening remarks, as well as sharing very broad perspectives on the vision of the ministry, how this intervention should be upheld in future. And indeed, there are lots of efforts ahead, and we are all happy to be on that trip and journey together. And we are expected to have the representative from the USAID. I can see on the screen.
I'm here.
Okay, excellent. Oh, great. Yes. So we are now pleased to welcome and invite online to this hybrid online/offline conference, Ms. Nadia Shah, who is the contract office representative at the United States Agency for International Development. Ms. Shah, the floor is yours.
Good morning. So I'm hearing myself. Okay, it stopped. Great, thanks. Good morning, dear colleagues and participants and Deputy Minister. Thank you very much for inviting me to this important event. I'm very glad to be here today and welcome you to the opening of the National Online Conference, looking forward integration of IDPs in Ukraine, challenges and perspectives for the state monitoring system of IDP integration. USAID is proud of its cooperation with the Ministry of Reintegration and Temporarily Occupied Territories of Ukraine to find durable solutions in support of reintegration of forcibly displaced and conflict-affected people in Eastern Ukraine and Crimea. Today's joint event with the Danish Refugee Council is just one example of that cooperation. Since 2014, USAID has supported the government of Ukraine to address the humanitarian and development challenges resulting from the ongoing armed conflict. USAID's Democratic Governance East program supports strengthening administrative service provision to IDPs and conflict-affected civilians from the non-government controlled territories. USAID's Human Rights in Action program partners with the ministry on the creation of a uniform system for monitoring and documenting human rights violations as a result of ongoing hostilities in Eastern Ukraine and Crimea's attempted annexation by the Russian Federation, and on the establishment of the National Center for Peacebuilding and Documentation. Last but not least, together with a number of humanitarian actors and development organizations, USAID participates in a joint sector working group on recovery and reintegration with the ministry to help ensure better coordination and stronger response in support of the Ukrainian government's efforts focused on strengthening good governance and service provision, humanitarian demining, promoting human rights, and laying a solid foundation for transitional justice and reconciliation, creating conditions for economic recovery, mitigating environmental risks, and safeguarding information sovereignty. However, despite great strides, the integration of internally displaced persons into host communities remains an ongoing issue. Thousands of people from Donetsk and Luhansk oblasts have been forced to leave their homes and rebuild their lives in new communities. This requires finding a home, employment, access to healthcare, understanding cultural nuances that vary from region to region, and sometimes even learning a new language, and so on. This is not a simple process and requires the government of Ukraine to develop appropriate policies and practices that will improve the lives of IDPs and allow durable solutions. the IDP Integration Initiative in Ukraine project in partnership with the Danish Refugee Council is critical to strengthening the ministry's capacity to improve the lives of IDPs and reintegrate the temporarily occupied territories of Ukraine. USAID has also been supporting the development of the government of Ukraine's strategy on IDP integration for 2020 through 2023, and sincerely hopes that today's event will contribute to a better understanding of how this strategy looks, informing all key stakeholders about the strategy and facilitate the creation of an action plan. USAID applauds the Ministry of Reintegration and Temporarily Occupied Territories for their efforts in defining the strategic approach to find durable solutions for IDP issues, and is looking forward to seeing the ministry's continued role leading the stakeholders in advancing this critical agenda. I am proud that USAID can be a part of this very important event, and we greatly value your cooperation. We greatly value our cooperation with Ukraine on all levels. Today's event reflects the continued long-term cooperation and mutual respect between USAID, the government of Ukraine, and international partners in our efforts to move Ukraine forward in many areas. I wish you a fruitful discussion and productive work today, and I look forward to hearing how it goes. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Shah, for this warm and very important, introductions and inputs. And we are indeed grateful for the support of USAID, which of course, is the main contributor to this important event today. And now I would like to proceed with the agenda of our conference and just share a very brief background before we continue with the session itself. So as many of you might know, in 2017, the government of Ukraine has declared its intention to introduce the monitoring of IDPs integration and their needs. And this objective was even outlined in one of the strategic directions of the IDP Integration National Strategy covering the period of 2017 and 2020. However, it was not really materialized in the implementation period of the strategy. The ultimate objective of this monitoring is to inform the national and local policies towards the integration of IDPs. And in response to this objective, apparently last summer in 2020, the Ministry for Reintegration of Temporarily Occupied Territories of Ukraine drafted the criteria for assessing the level of integration of IDPs into the host territorial communities and their needs. This document has presented 10 different criteria for assessing the level of integration, as well as different approaches to data collection, processing, and analysis for regular monitoring. Despite the overall clarity of the document, it has still left several questions and ambiguous points, which required further elaboration, particularly on the operationalization of all 10 criteria, as well as the implementation process itself. Therefore, last summer, thanks to the support of the USAID, Danish Refugee Council, with the expert support of Joint IDP Profiling Service, started supporting the Ministry for Reintegration in shaping this draft IDP integration criteria by the voices of IDPs, their host communities, and state and non-state actors, as well as best international practices. In this regard, we concretely conducted 2 different studies. And now I am pleased to give the floor to my colleague, Ms. Anastasia Fetisova, Capacity Building Project Officer, who will be presenting the findings of the desk research on the best international practices of IDPs integration criteria and indicators. Anastasia, the floor is yours, and you have 10 minutes. Thank you.
Доброго дня усім.
Hello, everyone. I hope you can hear me well. Thank you, Eka, for giving me the floor. I would like to briefly present the results of our desktop research on the criteria and indicators of IDP integration. And so you already can see the slides on the screen. And as Eka has rightly mentioned, this research started from a brief 3-page document under the title The Criteria of Integration of IDPs in their host communities. I will share more about the criteria described in this document, and I will tell you about another part of this document, the approaches to data collection and analysis. The basic raw idea behind this document was collecting the data on IDP integration by the employees of the social security departments, and then the data will go to the database owned by the Ministry of Social Policy, and then the data will be analyzed by the local authorities because, well, we are monitoring the integration of IDPs in the host communities. So this was the initial raw idea, and in order to test if this idea is actionable in the Ukrainian context and see if there are any challenges involved, we analyzed, on the one hand, the situation in Ukraine concerning the current statistics about IDPs. On the other hand, we also studied the experience of other post-conflict countries such as Azerbaijan, Georgia, and Serbia, which are somewhat similar to Ukraine, and they also have IDPs, and they have longer experience with internal displacement, so we can learn something from them. And also, on top of that, we reviewed the international documents and international recommendations defining the approaches to internal displacement and to measurement of IDP integration. Based on this research, we prepared some recommendations, and our expert right now is developing a guide on integration of IDP integration monitoring in Ukraine. So let us consider the international documents that describe the approaches to internal displacement and to the collection of statistics on the needs of the IDPs and the IDPs in general. The key document I would like to draw your attention to is document number 3 on this list, the International Recommendations on IDP Statistics of March 2020, and a couple of months ago the International Organization of Migration in Ukraine translated these recommendations into the Ukrainian language. So this document contains some definitions, some indicators that need to be collected to assess the numbers of IDPs, some key demographics about them, their needs, their integration, and so on. Also, you can see 2 basic documents that are quite popular among those who work with internal displacement. So these are the UN Guiding Principles on Internal Displacement, IASC Framework on Durable Solutions for IDPs, and one more document which is slightly less known because it is in a way specific. So these are Durable Solutions Indicator Library and Analysis Guide, developed by the IDP profiling system DRC-DDG. So what do we have in Ukraine right now? Let us consider. If you remember the beginning of this presentation, I started from the basic idea to collect the data on IDP needs through the database run by the Ministry of Social Policy. So right now, all the official statistics on IDPs in Ukraine is based on this database. All we know comes from this database. And taking into account the fact that the registration of IDPs is happening in a peculiar way and the data are getting into this database in some peculiar way, this results in some peculiarities in IDP statistics. First, if we consider who is in this database, we can see that these are not only IDPs, strictly speaking, but also the inhabitants of non-government controlled areas, which have to imitate displacement in order to get access to administrative services and payments. And also there are IDPs children who were born after displacement. So in essence, these children are not IDPs, but since the procedure implies that children can get this status, children are also included on the database. And also since this registration is voluntary, it's not mandatory, and so people who do not want to get registered for some reason, they are not registered as IDPs. What do we see as a result? On this chart, you can see the statistics about the registered IDPs in gray, and also the statistics by international organizations published on the website for the Center of Internal Displacement. And you can see that 2019 as compared to 2015, for example, is hugely different. Well, that's because this database by the Ministry of Social Policy does not have any mechanism which would enable finding out who actually is an IDP and who is not. And this is the key problem behind this total idea of using this database for IDP integration monitoring. So this was the database, and what are the other possible sources for IDP and its monitoring in Ukraine? Well, there are some surveys by the Ministry of Statistics, also the census, which is currently scheduled for 2023. Hopefully, it will provide some data on IDPs as well. Also, there are data of international organizations. So we have the national monitoring system of the IDP situations by the International Organization of Migration, and also there is REACH initiative, which is implemented on a regular basis. But the problem is that the key audience is not only IDPs, but also other conflict-related groups. And here I would like to show you some examples, namely from Georgia and Serbia, the countries which have extensive experience with IDPs. So these are examples about the registers. Let's consider Georgia. In Georgia, just like in Ukraine, there is a formal IDP status, a certain document owned by each IDP to prove their status, and until 2013, 2014, there was necessary registration for IDPs. So the decision was made to re-register all the IDPs mandatorily, which means all of the IDPs came to those registration points. And so right now in Georgia, they have an IDP database with more exact data than before. In Serbia, in contrast, there is no formal IDP status, which is in line with the international recommendations because, well, these people have not crossed the border of their state, so they do not have to do anything else to be entitled to all the rights, the same rights as other citizens. But they have the registry of IDP households, and in this register, there are only the IDPs which need governmental support. once they become less vulnerable or not vulnerable, they are excluded from this register, and for them, displacement stops to be a problem. So these are the two possible approaches to registers, and this raises the issue of how to understand when exactly the displacement ends, because according to the UN guiding principles, displacement has to end at some point when all the displacement-related problems were solved. And here is the final part of my presentation. Speaking of implementation of this monitoring through the unified database, there are certain things to be kept in mind. First of all, we need to decide about the purpose of the monitoring. If our only purpose is to track the trends in order to inform the policies and the budgeting process, that's one thing. But if there is another purpose of gradually reducing the number of IDPs in Ukraine, that's an entirely different thing. So we need to decide about the purpose of this monitoring, and probably in a short-term perspective, we can use some selective data collection while the database is not suitable. So we can use those surveys by the Government Statistics Service, and based on the purpose of the monitoring, we can subsequently plan the monitoring itself. And one more serious issue is that when the data are collected by the Departments of Social Protection, will they have enough technical capacity to interview all those people? Or maybe if the data are collected through the database, it's more about the data exchange between registers rather than about interviews.
Anastasia, for sharing very interesting findings. We all believe that the lessons learned from Azerbaijan, Georgia, and Serbia can contribute positively to the IDP integration measurement criteria in Ukraine. And now let's proceed with our agenda, and here, most importantly, the voices of IDPs and their host communities from Donetsk and Luhansk Oblast. And I would like to welcome and invite Ms. Inna Volosevich, who is the Deputy Director of InfoSapiens, the research company which was commissioned to conduct the consultation meetings with IDPs, their host vulnerable communities, the representatives of state and non-state actors, particularly on the draft IDP integration criteria and indicators. Ms. Volosevich, over to you, and you have 15 minutes.
Дякую. Всім доброго ранку.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. I will start, as usual, from the purpose and methodology of our research. We had two tasks before us. First, to operationalize the criteria developed by the ministry, as Kagwalia has shared already. And also the second objective was to discuss the possible ways for implementation of the IDP integration and defining the optimal methods of data collection. So since December till at the end of January, we collected data. We spoke to 30 key informants, representatives of the national, regional, and local authorities, UN agencies, international and national NGOs, and also we had 20 focus group discussions with IDPs and also representatives of vulnerable host communities in Donetsk and Luhansk oblasts. So I'm very grateful to all of those who participated. And here are some results. We started our discussions with the key informants and IDPs from the definition of an IDP, and we offered the international definition, according to which IDPs can be considered integrated as soon as they no longer need any specific assistance or protection related to displacement in their hosting communities. But the majority of the key informants, well, the majority agreed. Some key informants believe that this definition lacks an important part, that IDPs can be only considered integrated when there is no difference between them and the local population, the difference that would be caused by the displacement, and when all of their rights are restored, the rights that were hindered by the conflict. So the IDPs themselves believe that they will become integrated when they become the locals in the community. And some of them already have this feeling, some of them still don't. So they seek for the feeling of comfort and overall satisfaction with living conditions in the new community. And as Eka has already introduced in the beginning, there were 10 criteria, and we discussed each of those 10 criteria. So the first of those criteria is availability of temporary or permanent housing. And this is a huge problem for IDPs. The majority of IDPs rent their housing. They are not satisfied with the conditions, and they feel the risk of losing their housing at any moment. And they do not have enough money to buy any housing for themselves. They cannot sell their previous property in the NGCA, and they would like to get some support from the government in the form of co-financing of housing purchase or municipal houses for long-term cheap rent or partial or full compensation for the cost of the rent. The second criterion is the existence of regular income of a working age person. So as far as we understand the logic behind this criterion by the ministry is the fact that those who are not suitable for work, they are getting some social support from the government, but their spending level is not the same because they have to rent their housing. Quite often they have to support their relatives in the non-government controlled areas. So we have suggested, and this was approved by the key informants, the extension of this criteria, and the final language is the existence of a regular income of household members, which covers basic needs of household members. Unfortunately, the majority of the IDPs have noted that their living conditions have deteriorated after displacement because of the lower salaries. Another criterion about employment of working age IDPs, and actually unemployment is not as big a problem as low salaries. Anyway, IDPs are more vulnerable in this regard because they are much more limited in the social capital, which is highly relevant in small communities, and also quite often their education and experience is not in line with the requirements of the local market. So they would like the government to reconsider the limitation of the support which only provided for 6 months to IDPs. And also there is a criterion about barriers to accessing administrative services. So we see quite positive dynamics here. The majority of informants have mentioned that the procedures are simplified, and still a lot is required from IDPs. They have to collect more documents, for instance, to get a passport as compared to other citizens of Ukraine. So the IDPs would appreciate further simplification of this process and reducing all of these extra complexities that arise because of the displacement. One more criterion is barriers to accessing medical care and education. We heard some positive feedback about the healthcare reform because right now the address is not as important as before. But again, there is a problem about social capital because quite often they have difficulties with seeing the doctors, but they would like to see, especially in smaller communities. As for the access to education, IDPs have not mentioned any specific problems that would be difficult from the problems of the local population. And actually, they are noticing some advantages for IDPs in educational institutions. One more criterion is about barriers to receiving pensions and social security payments. According to most participants, these problems are not critical, but there were some situations when IDPs were not able to collect the necessary documents. And also in Starobilsk, the local citizens mentioned that there are problems with IDPs getting their money in the bank, and sometimes they were even forced to buy some insurance, which is not obligatory at all. And one more criterion is belonging to permanent social groups of a host territorial community. The main barrier here for this feeling of belonging is some discrimination, some worse attitude, although the majority of IDPs mentioned that they faced these problems only in the first years. After that, some adaptation has happened on their part, and also the opinion in the public has changed, so right now they do not feel any specific attitude. One more barrier is disunity of families when some family members still reside in non-government controlled areas of Luhansk and Donetsk oblasts, and so family members have to travel on a regular basis. Also, some IDPs do not vote because they do not feel as someone fully belonging there, or also some do not know about the required procedure or just do not have time or desire to do this. But everyone agrees that it's very important to have this feeling of belonging in the host community. And finally, there is a criterion of reunification of family members, and we also suggest to rephrase this criterion as barriers to reunification with relatives in the NGCA and the needs for their support. Because indeed, the need for the financial support of relatives from NGCA and the need of regular travels to those regions, these are very important barriers to reintegration of IDPs. But the key problem is the issue of housing, but they have challenges with housing for themselves and their relatives. And now some words about data collection. on IDP integration. As Anastasia has shared, the basic idea is to collect data through the departments of social protection. Unfortunately, the participants of the discussion were disapproval of this concept because they assume that there can be some conflict of interests, and also they have doubts about the level of training of the employees of those institutions, and also one more component, since visiting of those social protection departments, IDPs are not willing to have this additional stay in those facilities. So online and telephone interviews, especially in the times of the pandemic, were faced with a better level of approval. At the same time, international organizations and governmental institutions that do not have any direct contact with IDPs, they are perceived quite positively as initiators of the service, as well as independent research companies. So we have tested one of the possible questionnaires developed in accordance with the aforementioned criteria. So all the questions worked quite well, except for the question about income, which we took from the questionnaire by the Ministry by the Statistics Service. And even though we guaranteed anonymity, still the question was quite complicated and sensitive, and the IDPs sometimes did not want to answer. And the key informants had the same kinds of fears about this way of collecting data. The problems are about the possible distrust of IDPs, lack of training in the staff, and the lack of resources. So there are two possible approaches to data collection suggested by the key informants. The first one is contracting an independent agency, and the second one is adding a module for IDPs by the state statistics service in their household survey. So this would solve the issue with the sensitive issue with the income, because they already have well-trained interviewers, and they can motivate people to answer the questions. And if it is implemented as a short external survey, we suggest not to use direct questions about income, but to use indirect questions about things people can afford and things that people cannot afford. So the recommendations are included in the report. Thank you for your attention, and thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Volosevich, for a very comprehensive and insightful presentation. And herewith, I would like to announce that we will be sharing the reports of both studies with all the participants of the conference later this week. And now I think we can move to the next session and look into the recommendations and perspectives for the actual implementation of the state monitoring system of IDPs integration. In this panel, we will have two speakers, Ms. Anastasia Fetisova from Danish Refugee Council and Ms. Irina Kalupaha, the head of the Department for Social and Humanitarian Policies and IDPs at the Ministry for Reintegration of Temporarily Occupied Territories of Ukraine. The ladies, the floor is yours, and you have 15 minutes for this session. Thank you.
Thank you, Eka. And right now, I will show you another presentation with the recommendations developed based on the results of the research. We still continue our work together with the Ministry of Reintegration working on the criteria and data collection approaches. Right now, our expert is working, but here are some of the recommendations that are here already, and maybe Irina briefly will comment about the prospects of implementation in Ukraine. Generally speaking, to introduce this monitoring, it's very important to define the general goal of the monitoring. So once we know what the purpose is, whether we only want to track the trends about the conditions of IDPs and also to inform the political decisions and the budgeting process, or we also want to gradually reduce the number of IDPs. And so we have to set some target objectives for each of the indicators. As for the sources of data, we believe that the sources need to be multiple. And based on the international recommendations of IRIS concerning IDP statistics, these sources can include registers, which is already available, and also some service by the state statistics service, which can be implemented as a part of the household survey or the workforce survey. And also one more tool is the census. So if the census will contain a question which will enable identification of IDPs, this will give us a possibility to define whether the IDPs are integrated or not. As for the database by the Ministry of Social Policy, right now it is very important first to define the system for IDP registration to make sure that people are registered as IDPs meet the definition from the legislation. So we will need to cleanse the database later by defining and separating those who are not IDPs and also eliminating the duplicate entries, and only then we will be able to use this database as a source of data about IDP needs. So as for the data for this database, it's another big challenge, because if we need to update this data on IDP needs on a regular basis, we would need to collect this data on a regular basis, for instance, annually. And speaking to 1 million people each year, that would be a huge challenge. As Ina has mentioned, the survey that would take 20 or 30 minutes, it will be negatively perceived by IDPs, and this will raise challenges about data quality. So this raises the issue of establishing relations between different data systems to enable getting the data from other registries, and thus we would know about the needs of IDPs as well. The floor goes to Irina. Thank you. Hello, dear colleagues. First, I would like to express our gratitude for organization of this platform for the discussion of important issues. We are very grateful for your ongoing support in these important issues and implementation of the government policy concerning IDPs. And the current situation is as follows. We all know that our integration strategy was limited in time, and formally it is over right now. We understand that it's not the end of our path towards the objectives outlined by the strategy. So right now the ministry is developing another strategy about the strategic solutions for IDPs. Right now, unfortunately, the only information we have is the information from our international partners, and it's not a fully comprehensive information about IDPs, because we have to introduce a governmental system for the monitoring of the IDP situations, because usually the international partners have their own criteria for the assessment of the integration levels, and we have to introduce our own criteria that would inform the governmental IDP policy. So this is something we are working on together with our international partners. Also, I would like to point out that we have quite good grounds for the introduction of this monitoring. We have a database on IDPs owned by the Ministry of Social Policy. It is by no means perfect, but it contains much of the available information on IDPs. Also, we should not forget about the State Statistics Service, which also has some information, and right now our task is to develop some synergy between those two information sources and to have our own data about the integration of IDPs. These data, and actually we have mentioned here the purpose of those data, and it's the data necessary to inform the policy enabling the integration of as large a number of IDPs as possible. Therefore, we are very grateful for today's platform, and I'm sure we will hear a lot of useful ideas about the implementation of this mechanism, thus reducing the discrepancies in the data about IDPs. Thank you.
Very much, Ms. Kalupacha. Thank you, Anastasia, for the interesting food for thought. And we very much hope that we will be finding together some of the responses to those questions in the following sessions of this conference. And let's proceed now with the agenda. We are quite good with timing, so that's great. And the objective of this next session is to discuss, reflect, and find jointly the responses to the following question: which lessons from the international experience can be relevant and replicable in Ukraine? And we will hear the insights from very honorable and distinguished group of speakers who bring a very rich experience and perspectives on internal displacement. And I'm very, very pleased to welcome and invite Professor Walter Kalin, member of the Expert Advisory Group for the United Nations Secretary General's High-Level Panel on Internal Displacement. Professor Kalin, the floor is yours. We don't see yet Professor Kalin on the screen, but I hope our technical support team is helping us to get an access. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Honorable Deputy Minister, dear participants. Let me start with my sincere thanks to the organizers of this event, but also to those who commissioned and carried out these two excellent studies. Let me make it very clear from the beginning on: data, statistics, monitoring That's really not my area of expertise. And I think it would be presumptuous of me to offer advice on all the technical details that have been presented. However, I'm very happy to put our discussion into a wider context. I have 3 points. First, monitoring and measuring progress towards durable solutions. This is a challenge faced by many countries. And even though it might sound a bit disappointing to you, there are very few countries who really have tried it or who have succeeded in doing it. You presented the situation in Azerbaijan, in Georgia and Serbia, and much can be learned from these cases. But it also has become clear none of these countries has developed a full model of how best to do it. And that's the situation in many countries, but there are a few exceptions. Somalia's federal government recently adopted a durable solutions strategy. It just started to work on developing indicators to monitor progress together with international partners. Because for the government, it is important to know whether the strategy is effective or not. This is easy to the extent that the strategy already helps to define the indicators. And I think that's one first lesson, to link strategies then with the monitoring process. The big problem in Somalia, as in many other countries, is there are no baseline data. So how to build on them? And that's particularly difficult in a country like Somalia with 2.6 million IDPs. You're in a much better position regarding figures. There is one country that really developed a very sophisticated model. This is Colombia. In 2004, the Constitutional Court of Colombia decided that the situation of IDPs was violating the Constitution, that it amounted to an unconstitutional state of affairs. And the court required authorities to regularly report on improvements. It didn't work well. And this is why in 2007, the Constitutional Court adopted a very detailed list of indicators. And the administration was obliged to use those indicators to report to the court on progress made. Of course, that's not a model that can be applied to Ukraine. It was a very different process. But what I want to say with all these examples is Ukraine really is in a unique situation. Ukraine has the opportunity now to develop a good model that not only works for Ukraine, but that might serve for other governments too. My second point. I've been introduced as a member of the expert advisory group of the high-level panel on internal displacement, the body set up by the Secretary General to look at how better to respond, and particularly how better to find solutions for internal displacement. The high-level panel is in the process of finalizing its report. It has not been adopted yet, so I cannot tell you what exactly the outcomes and recommendations will be. However, I already can say now that on the basis of many consultations and discussions, the high-level panel is thinking about some key recommendations that are, on the one hand, certainly very useful for your country, but on the other hand, that also are very much in line with what I have heard this morning. The high-level panel is convinced that mechanisms to collect, analyze, and assess relevant data must respond to 3 criteria. First, they must be comprehensive. This means they must go beyond humanitarian assessments. They must second be what we call interoperable, meaning they must be framed in a way that the data can be used by all relevant ministries, humanitarian actors, development actors, etc. And finally, it is important that the mechanisms are really owned by the government. Let me explain a little bit. How to ensure that data are comprehensive, looking at all the relevant aspects for local integration. It means first to have comprehensive indicators as are proposed and as are in line with the durable solutions framework adopted by the Interagency Standing Committee. But it also means that in the data collection and analysis, relevant actors are involved. So in your context, of course, Ministry for Integration of Temporarily Occupied Territories and the Ministry for Social Policy. I also think ministries, line ministries such as Ministry of Education, of Health, etc., public works are very important. And this then requires to ask questions in a way that they speak to all these different actors, including to the local authorities. And finally, to have a system that is owned by the government is important to enhance political commitment. It should not be imposed, this data, by international actors. And it's also important to enhance the capacity of authorities, because both collecting, but then also assessing builds capacity. Third and last point, and it's very important, as Anastasia has mentioned, among others, clarity regarding the purpose. The very excellent example from Colombia is of limited value because the purpose was a very specific one, reporting to the court. That's different from what you are going to do. One can look at the purpose as who is no longer an IDP because he or she has found a solution. So who can we take off the list? That's one purpose. But it's a bit tricky. First, whether you feel to be an IDP or not is to some extent very subjective. And second, the big problem in Ukraine is that some benefits are linked to registration, such as social pensions. So why should I give up to be registered as an IDP if I lose my pension? It has nothing to do with local integration. So my recommendation would be to really look at the whole exercise to measure progress of policies. How far are we on the track towards local integration? What are the obstacles? What can we do to remove them? What can we do to accelerate that process? Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Professor Kalin, for your time, for your very insightful and comprehensive contributions. As it was expected, it is a pleasure having you in this conference today. And I think we all have lots of takeaways from your contribution to work as our homework together, hand in hand with the Ministry for Reintegration of Temporarily Occupied Territories, as well as other line ministries and the local self-government bodies, both on regional and local level. We now would like to welcome Ms. Wilhelmina Welsh, who is the Acting Coordinator and Head of Information Management and Innovation and Joint IDP Profiling Service. As already mentioned earlier, Danish Refugee Council has been receiving the expert support from JIPS since last summer, and we are very grateful for this collaboration. Wilhelmina, the floor is yours, and you have 10-15 minutes for your contribution. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Eka, and Honorable Deputy Minister and colleagues. Thank you very much for the invitation, also to speak at this specific panel. I'm very honored. I will just try and share my screen. I have a small presentation prepared for you just to run through some of the examples, or to tie in some of the thoughts that we already heard in international practice apologies. So I will just start with a word on the Joint IDP Profiling Service and why we are speaking here. We are a service that was established in 2009. We're a technical interagency service provider, so to say. I like to call us a plug-in. We come in to support those processes in creating evidence collaboratively for the analysis of durable solutions. We're field-focused and neutral, enabling the government-owned process on durable solutions. So just a small overview on our composition of the executive committee of those organizations that have agreed to put in place this interagency service. What I wanted to do very briefly today is not to unpack all the complexities of measuring durable solutions and integration of IDPs, but just to share a few examples from the lessons that we have learned supporting countries in establishing those processes, but also not only speaking for us as JIPS and the technical service, we have sort of established a durable solutions learning community where partners who are also part of the agenda later today, international organizations and others who are practicing, who are collecting examples and experience, are coming together to share. So I'll try and be an ambassador for that as well and share some of those experiences with you. Looking at the purpose, I think, is a core element that has already been highlighted. Why are we doing this? And defining the purpose will be very different for Ukraine compared to other contexts. But ultimately, we are collecting evidence, or you will be collecting this evidence in order to look at interventions in areas of displacement or return, of course, in this case, of local integration that are contextualized, that are locally anchored, linked to development and local planning processes, and that ultimately build those conducive environments for self-reliance and reintegration for internally displaced persons. And we see in practice very often that this context or this bigger picture is often lacking when we start to talk about measurements, because ultimately displaced persons do not live isolated from the places they settle in or the places they left behind. They live as part of the wider community and society, and that is important to take into consideration when we talk about establishment of a measurement. And I'll get back to that point in a little bit. Just referring back to the foundations, of course, you're familiar with the EASC framework on durable solutions, and the initial definition or sort of the initial list or initial thought on durable solutions that can be achieved through return and reintegration, sustainable local integration, sustainable integration to another part of the country, and I've added a small "and" there, because the achievement and the preference for a durable solution is not linked to the physical settlement or the physical area of where IDPs reside. Rather, the options need to be understood as not as a static choice, but as something that is up to the preferences of those who have been displaced. And I've added a small "and" here because human mobility, as we increasingly see, is also a viable or a solution that is sometimes chosen by IDPs, meaning that it can contribute or can constitute an important mechanism for internally displaced seeking solutions. Very briefly, the core components of the framework and how do we evaluate which solution can be achieved, how do we measure progress towards those solutions, is looking at those four boxes, those four components. IDP perspectives on durable solutions, as was mentioned already, are of course a core component of that. Then we have 8 criteria looking at durable solutions across the board, establishing if IDPs and to what extent IDPs are actually still disadvantaged compared to those who have not been displaced. Part of that framework, of course, is also the demographic profile of those who have been displaced, and of course, as I mentioned, the wider context. And I'll give examples of that. As you mentioned, rightly so, the international recommendations on internally displaced persons and the creation of statistics on IDPs have refined those options have refined the language and definitions of how we understand solutions. So here we're talking about return to the place of habitual residence and reintegration into the community, the local integration in the new place of usual residence or settlement somewhere else in the country. So those are just fine additions or definitions on the technical side when we unpack that for measurement. It is important to highlight that reintegration, integration, and sustainability entail that IDPs are not discriminated against or not facing any specific protection or assisting needs in relation to their displacement. They're expected to be able to exercise their rights in the same way as the usually resident population, of course. I'm mentioning this because of the complexity or the different elements that might come into play when you design the measurement of integration. Just to share two regional examples and the importance of those elements. The first one being from a profiling that now dates quite a while ago, but it's nevertheless relevant in Kosovo. And it is important to understand linking or understanding intentions and capacities of the IDPs for their preferred solution, meaning that we have the 8 criteria that can help us objectively measure progress towards one solution, in this case, local integration. And we also need to look at IDPs' preferences and their capacities to achieve those solutions. The example from Kosovo shows that return was the preferred option. However, when looked at the actions that households have made in that direction and the required skills that they had, that option looked less feasible. Only a small proportion had discussed return with their neighbors and received a positive reaction. And those youth who did grow up in a situation of displacement did not have the required language skills prevalent in their areas of return. And that is just to highlight how linking the intentions, linking the desire to seek a solution, for example, needs to be matched with the capacities of those who have been displaced. Just another example from the report and from the exercise itself was looking at the demographic breakdown and profile and in conjunction with preferences for those solutions. So elements like, of course, employment, education, as you already mentioned, language skills, etc., become very important in understanding how IDPs are able to progress against their preferred solution. I wanted to give a second example, which I think is very close or maybe very relevant for the discussion today from Greece. And here, the profiling exercise in setting up a collaborative process with the local authorities in Thessaloniki was looking at those initial core elements I presented to you and adapting them for their own purpose. Their purpose was indeed as well to generate a list of indicators to be able to measure local integration, but their purpose was also to understand barriers to local integration, to understand preferences, and to set up this collaborative process, as Professor Kalin highlighted, which is equally important, how this evidence is generated. And for the profiling in Thessaloniki, we looked at future intentions, we looked at the demographic profile, and we looked at 4 areas of local integration: legal integration, legal documentation and rights; economic integration, access to employment and livelihood strategies; socio-cultural integration, access to services, housing, etc., and local and civic integration, local participation, so to say. Very briefly on the process and measuring, the collaborative platform, the group that worked on defining the tools on carrying out this analysis on local integration, highlighted 4 core elements to be considered. The first one being that integration is a multifaceted concept, looking at those 4 dimensions: legal, economic, socio-cultural, and political. It is a gradual process, meaning that measuring integration needs to allow for flexibility to move from limited integration to more fully or embracing a more full engagement in those senses. And is a process that includes many actors. Understanding integration and doing integration analysis involves this collaborative process, involves many different actors from the local authorities, from different sides, from civil society, and as well from IDPs and the hosting population. And lastly, integration is a process defined by the future intentions of the persons as well as their demographic characteristics. For understanding the last point, the visual that you have here is looking at interactive approaches informing the local integration analysis done with those who have been displaced. So we combined, let's say, a quantitative element with a qualitative element to be able to cover those two aspects. And with that, I will close with summarizing a few key messages. Measurement towards progress of full economic, socioeconomic, legal, and civic integration can only be done if it also includes the perspectives of internally displaced persons. And that is sort of a lesson I'm bringing back to you from the Durable Solutions Learning community. At the moment, in different contexts, we're looking at practice that consolidates more and more around using objective and subjective measures of integration, meaning those criteria, those more generic criteria, the objective measures on economic, socioeconomic, legal, and civic integration in conjunction with more subjective measures. As integration is a gradual process, it will require some thinking around measurement over time to understand progress. And it is a two-way street, meaning that in other field practice, we look at integration as a concept of belonging, as well as acceptance from those who are receiving IDPs. So it is a comparative approach, or it has a comparative or a two-sided approach where we look at belonging as well as acceptance. Again, it needs to match the resources and perceptions of internally displaced persons with their experience of integration and future preferences. And lastly, to close, it needs to take into account the wider context that supports your work as the government of Ukraine in providing conducive environments for those durable solutions. Thank you very much for giving me the floor.
Thank you very much, Wilhelmina. Your presentation and your contribution has made it even more obvious that we have embarked on a very important and complex journey, and we still have to research, learn from different experiences, pilot, and analyze different approaches for finding the best, let's say, approaches for the sustainable local integration in Ukraine. And now perhaps we could extend our focus from Kosovo and Greece to Georgia. And as already mentioned, the focus of our desk research, one of the countries' case studies, was Georgia. And we would like to invite to this session Ms. Shorena Tsiklauri, Head of Department of the Population Census and Demographic Statistics at National Statistics Office of Georgia. Shorena, over to you. We can't see Shorena yet at the screen, so hopefully she will appear soon.
Hello?
And you have 15 minutes for your presentation. Thank you very much.
And hello, can you hear me?
Yes, yes, we can hear you well.
Good. I will try to share my screen as well. Can you see my screen as well?
Yes, the screen is there.
Okay. Thank you so much, Eka. Dear colleagues, hello everybody. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for inviting me for this very important event and have an opportunity to talk and share about Georgia's experience, how we are collecting IDP statistics in Georgia, and what is our main challenges and approaches. Shortly about the Geostat, National Statistics Office of Georgia, shortly Geostat, the legal entity of public law, carries out its activities in accordance with UN principles and recommendations. By law, Geostat is the coordination of the national statistical systems in Georgia. Our mission is to produce and disseminate the high quality, timely, and relevant official statistics in an effective manner based on user needs and according to the Georgian legislation. Uh, the department where I'm working, the Population Census and Demographic Statistics Department, main function is to produce the demographic statistical data as well as to plan, organize, and conduct population censuses in our country. As the main source of the population and the demographic statistics is Georgia are for the vital statistics of births and deaths, marriages and divorces. We have administrative data sources as well as for international migration. We are using border crossing data. For the internal migration and for the official IDP statistics as well as the refugee statistics, only source is population censuses, and last population census in our country conducted in 2014. We had some questions about this. During the census, we collect huge numbers of the information like population's living condition, household structure, some socio-demographic and economic characteristics, as well as we collect information on migration and disability. But also we have the special module for displaced persons. We asked respondents about their IDP or refugee status, as well as we collected information from which municipalities or from which country we are living before acquiring the status of IDPs of refugees. What is the advantages and disadvantages of the collections, the forced displaced and IDP statistics from the censuses? The main advantages is that since we are collecting huge range of information, we can disseminate the results of IDPs by sex, age, some socioeconomic or other characteristics. Also, it allows us to make comparison with other group of population like other migrants or other populations who are non-IDPs. And also, it is well known that census is a best sampling frame for any surveys, including special surveys for IDP studies. But census has its limitation because it is very difficult to compare the census results with administrative sources. The main reason is that from the census, this based on the self-identification of the respondents about their IDP status, since the administrative data is based on the legal status of IDPs, as well as another challenge might be that census collect information only usual residence population during reference period of the census, since the IDPs administrative sources has all registered IDPs. So you might find some difference, and in Georgia we find some difference between census data and administrative data. And here is our results. We found only 190,000 IDPs during stocks of IDPs during the population census 2014, and it is not a surprise that most of them are from Abkhazia, 84%, and this 190% is 5% of total population of Georgia. And if we analyze the regional pictures, we will see that most of them are living in the capital city. Almost 7% of IDPs of Tbilisi's population has IDP status, and also the high share has this region nearby of the occupied territories. It was 10% in the Mtskheta-Mtianeti region, so population of Mtskheta-Mtianeti regions, 10% had IDP status during the census, and it was 13% of Samegrelo and the Mswaneti region. Also, you know that census conducted every 10 years, and sometimes we need the data annual basis. In Georgia, we have some other quarterly surveys, like labor force surveys, household integrated surveys, and other surveys, where we are asking the questions we are asking the special status of the respondents among the IDP status. But this survey has its limitation. The main purpose of this labor force and integrated household surveys are to study the labor force, incomes, and expenditure. So sample design is to study these above-mentioned issues. Also, sometimes sample size is too small and it don't allow us to disseminate results of IDPs. But even in our case, even we increase the sample size of our quarterly surveys, the sample design still remains a challenge. The matter is that some IDPs in some settlements are compactly settled. So it means that if the sample design includes the settlements, it will automatically increase the weight of the region, or vice versa. So we must to be very careful, and we must to analyze the sample size and sample design where we are going to conduct the surveys on IDPs, and if we want to disseminate results. Another data sources is the mix, which is conducted in Georgia in 2014. It was designed to provide the estimates for a large number of indicators of the to study the situation of the women and children at the national level, as well as by urban and rural areas and 10 regions, and we had special strata for IDPs. So our sample design during the mix was that we divided country by regions, urban, rurals, and each urban, rurals we had two types of strata, one with IDPs and without another with non-IDPs. We assuming that IDP strata was the strata with population who had IDP status more than 48%. So these results, these surveys allows us to disseminate results and compare the IDPs and non-IDP population. Also, something about this administrative data sources. As I mentioned, and one of the sources could be administrative data. And in Georgia in 2013, the line minister conducted this mandatory re-registration exercise for IDPs in Georgia. It was conducted in 2013 from August to end of the year. The main purpose for this exercise was to identify the exact numbers of IDPs because databases needed the update. This last before this 2013, the exercise was conducted to 2007. It means that databases was too old, and this registration process found that found the 9% less IDPs were before registration process. So beginning of the registration process, we had 9% more IDPs registered in the databases than was registered during the during this re-registration exercise. So it means that we must to assess administrative data if we need to produce the statistics. About the future plans of my department and of the Geostats, it should be noted that since 2018, Georgia is a member of expert group or refugees and international person statistics EGRIS, and we were actively involved in the developing of international recommendation of IDP statistics. And also we continue our work on this EGRIS, and we are working to some, we are actively working some working groups, and we are developing some manuals. Regarding our plan to improve demographic and population statistics, including the IDP statistics in our department, we are going to assess the administrative sources for producing IDP statistics, because we understand that population census is a good source, but as I already mentioned, we have only in 10 years. It means that we need to produce the statistics annual basis. So one of the source might be the administrative data before we need to assess these sources. Also, we're going to start some activities, measurement to establish the population register in our countries. The population register is the best source for any kind of population statistics like migration and especially for IDP statistics. And also, we are looking for new alternative data sources, and we are working now some methodology to produce the migration statistics, I mean the internal migration statistics at the first stage using the big data, namely the mobile phone data. And also very important is that we are preparing to conduct our next population census in Georgia. Unfortunately, the exact date, method, and methodology is still under discussion because our main challenge is financial support, but our plan is to conduct it in 2023. As before, we are going to use this GIS, Geographic Information System, because it is excellent opportunity for dividing country by enumeration areas. Also, it helps us a lot for field monitoring, and as well as it allows us to disseminate the result. And also, in our webpage, we have this nice maps of IDP statistics. And also, as previously, we are going to collect personal identification numbers, because it allows us to link this census data with existing administrative data like civil register, birth register, IDPs register, refugee registers, etc., and to check quality of our variables. And also, we are going to close collaboration with line ministries to conduct proper interview to collect the information on forced displaced persons like refugees, because the line ministers has opportunity to help Geostat to make the proper interview, because some refugees, they don't speak fluently in Georgia, even in English or in Russian, so we need their help. So they helped us a lot during population census 2014, and we are going to have close collaboration as well. It was my last slides. Thank you so much for your attention, and I will be happy to respond to your questions if any.
Thank you very much, Mr. Lowry, for your time, for your participation, and we believe we will be continuing this communication, coordination, and collaboration with you throughout the process of the development of the data approaches, particularly, so we can learn actually from some of your very tangible lessons. And now I would like to announce the break. So we will have a break for 15 minutes and we will be back at 12:55 sharp. And just one favor to the panelists of the next session, please don't log out from the webinar room to make sure that we can easily facilitate your access technically to the Zoom platform. Thank you very much for everyone who has been joining us so far in this conference. Welcome back, and thank you very much to those of you who has rejoined this online conference. We are continuing with the final session, which is entitled Monitoring of IDPs Integration from the National and International Perspectives. And we will hear the insights in this session from the representatives of state as well as non-state institutions on the current situation, as well as their perspectives for the actual implementation of the state monitoring of IDPs integration in Ukraine. We have set one core question to this panel discussion, which is the following. What are the main prerequisites and the main limitations for the implementation of the state monitoring of IDPs? And we will have a quite broad group of panelists who are bringing quite diverse experience, who have already very direct engagement with this topic. Just a technical reminder that each panelist will have 10 minutes. And it would be great if, in addition to the core question of this panel discussion, they can also briefly outline and share how their work has been connected to the IDP integration monitoring so far. So we have slight changes in the sequence of the panelists, and I have been informed that Mr. Alexander Kalinin from the Ministry of Social Policy is not yet available in this webinar room. Therefore, I would like to ask Ms. Olena Shevtsova, who is the Deputy Director of Administrative Directorate and the Head of Organizational Support Department from the State Statistics Service of Ukraine. Ms. Shevtsova, the floor is yours, and you have 10 minutes to respond to our core question as well as share your the information about your background work briefly. Thank you.
Щиро дякую. Хотіла
Thank you so much. I would like to begin with the words of gratitude to the organizers, and I congratulate you on this wonderful fundamental research that you have completed, which laid the foundation for long-term solutions for IDPs. I will begin with the answer to the question of the most important thing. I believe partnership is crucial here, and active involvement of stakeholders at all levels, deepening and strengthening the partnerships and finding the best mechanisms, the best time and financial resources to be used effectively to implement these tasks. So the importance of our today's subject is unquestionable, and indeed the research that was completed is highly relevant for the technical working group on the implementation of international recommendations. And as you are probably aware, in 2020, there were new recommendations approved concerning the statistics on IDPs, and we are members of this committee, so we have initiated this broad discussion of implementation of these recommendations in Ukraine. Based on the recommendations, we created a working group, and implementation of these international recommendations is highly important for harmonization of statistics on internally displaced people, and also for the improvement of coordination. All of this will contribute to the implementation of the main principle of the agenda, to leave no one behind, and also will contribute to development of evidence for the informed policy for IDPs. So the working group is a kind of a platform, a kind of a coordination mechanism for information exchange and subsequent development of the roadmap for the implementation of recommendations in Ukraine. Also, one more idea is to support the international recommendations, and I'm pleased to note that we have quite a representative membership of the working group. We have the Ministry of Social Policy, Ministry of Reintegration of Temporary Occupied Territories, the Secretariat of the Ombudsperson on Human Rights, Social Service, and also a pension fund, international organizations such as the International Organization of Migration, the Danish Refugee Council, and I would like to express our gratitude for your active position and your contribution to the work of this working group. Also, we have representation from the civil society, the Analytic Center, CIDES, and also the International Working Group on the statistics on IDPs. And also we are in discussion with representatives of the Ministry for Digital Transformation. So our work will consist of two stages, and one stage, which is a preliminary stage. It's a preparation of the analytic document about the international recommendations and the current condition in Ukraine concerning the adaptation of the key components written down in this document concerning IDPs. So currently we are at the stage of finalization of this work, and I hope that we will quite soon implement. We will organize a webinar and we will welcome all of you there. So we are also working with the international partners, and the work of our working group was already congratulated by the group on strategic development goals, and also the webinar of the High Commissionary on Refugee Rights also participated there. So together with Panama, Dominican Republic, and other participants. So this work is being coordinated by the State Statistics Service together with the International Organization of Migration. So I'm pleased that we have the specialist from the International Organization of Migration, Roman. Thank you. Thank you, Olena. Thank you for invitation. Using this opportunity, I would like to mention that we, the International Organization of Migration, highly appreciate our collaboration with the State Statistics Service concerning the development of the roadmap for IRIS implementation in Ukraine. As for the recommendations on themselves, we probably do not have enough time, and probably we don't even need to discuss it because the recommendations were already introduced by other speakers. I will just briefly remind about the main things, the collection of the statistics about the three main groups and the differences of the operational statistics. So since 2017, IOM measures the integration into local communities using the data of the National Monitoring System Service. In this working group, we have defined that this statistics is not to be viewed as official because governmental institutions are not taking part in the data collection, and we also are not using the IRIS criteria, and basically we are using the self-assessment of IDPs. But generally this methodology is based on scientific principles and covers the statistical sample of IDPs in their host communities and in other places, so that the data has been collected over a long time, and so this data can be used for the triangulation of official data once these data are available. I will give some examples about the data of IDP integration, and in the 12th round of our measurement, we had about 55% of those who consider themselves fully integrated, 1/3 of those who are partially integrated, and there were 6% of those who do not consider themselves integrated, and 5% have not answered the question. So again, this is self-assessment. This is not something according to the IRIS criteria. And the main conditions for the successful integration of IDPs is availability of housing and permanent income. So the first two conditions are the most frequently mentioned in the 12th round, but as for the possibility to live close to the family, again, it's growing from 45 to 55%. Maybe this was conditioned by the limitations in the work of the checkpoints on the contact line, and also there were other conditions such as employment, access to social services, support of the local community, accessibility of documents. Also, new integration options were added, such as comfortable living conditions, access to water, electricity, sewerage, and also support by the local communities. And these were 30 and 22% respectively. Also, it's quite interesting to look into the detailed analysis of self-assessment. We saw the connection with objective and subjective factors. So those who are unemployed or faced difficulties while finding employment, they were more frequent to report that they do not feel as integrated, and vice versa. And also we noticed that there are differences in the feeling of being integrated based on the fact if the person has some own housing. And so 3/4 of those who have own housing believe that they are integrated. Also, the data shows the connection between the feeling of integration and subjective criteria such as feeling discriminated, which implies the attitudes of the local community to the IDPs, and 3/4 of the people who had this experience of discrimination, they reported they do not feel as integrated, and vice versa. Among those who did not have such experience, only 39% reported that they are not integrated. And also these people were less likely to have the desire to come back to their original place of residence. There is no unified practice for the measurement of durable solutions, but there are some attempts to create it, and we surely understand that the development of such approaches is a pressing need to develop the proper policies and programmatic solutions. Thank you so much. That's it from me, and I'm giving the floor to the next speakers.
Thank you very much, Ms. Shevtsova. Thank you very much, Mr. Lunin, for very interesting insights. And indeed, there is still lots of work ahead to be followed. Just to check whether the representative from Ministry of Social Policy is available. I think, yes, not yet. So perhaps then we can proceed with the representatives of the non-state institutions. And I would like to give the floor to Ms. Olena Tiskevich, a legal advisor from United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees, Ukraine office. And just to highlight the question again for Ms. Tiskevich, so what do you think are the main prerequisites and the main limitations for the implementation of the integration state monitoring in Ukraine? Please, the floor is yours, and you have 10 minutes for your contribution.
Thank you, Eka. Вітаю, колеги. Дякую дуже за запрошення на цей захід.
Hello, colleagues. Thank you for the invitation. I will only briefly point out the main key elements that need to be mentioned here. So, as it was mentioned here on many occasions, local integration is a priority. The two other priorities are not relevant as of now. The main issue is correcting the statistics, which has influence on all the related issues, because the IDP certificate, which according to the international standards would have to reflect the needs, unfortunately, it simply has become the key to governmental services and governmental support, which contributes to the fact that the data about real IDPs are not confirmed, and this needs to be reconsidered. This impacts the process of reintegration, because people have to keep those certificates to keep their access to services and payments, and this is a barrier for the real integration of IDPs in their host communities. So, and as IDPs believe, this is important for their integration, and they have to keep this document to keep their access to services and payments. So here are the three main steps that would contribute to the trustworthy statistics and also contribute to integration and also contribute to measurements. A person is not integrated if the person does not consider themselves integrated. So the first thing that needs to be done is departing the certificate of IDPs from the access to governmental support. And in this case, the certificate would only serve the purpose of actually showing some extra needs on the part of the IDP. And this will also help the government to find the proper amounts of resources to support IDP integration. The second element here is a reconsideration of approaches to IDP registration. And as it was mentioned here by the State Statistics Service and the Ministry of Reintegration, such cooperation is very welcomed. And on our part, I would state that we support the idea of such cooperation with the purpose of obtaining trustworthy statistics. So the new document is currently being developed. We hoped for its approval, and thanks to that, IDPs will get the tools they need for integration. And the third component is monitoring in the host communities. I fully agree that some formats need to be developed with the support of international organizations, non-governmental organizations, which can be involved in the process of development and monitoring. Also, it's very important that many of the IDPs who lived in the government-controlled areas for over a long time, they organize into non-governmental organizations and communities, and this creates conditions for their participation in decision-making. So we also should not forget about this, that the leaders of these communities should at least take part in the decision-making. Thank you for your attention.
Much, Ms. Tiskevich. You've raised really important points that we have also encountered throughout the process, and these are the elements that we certainly need to follow up and to consider in quite a comprehensive way in the actual, implementation process. Now I would like to give the floor to Mr. Sergei Marushenko. He is representing Council of Europe, and he is the project officer for the project International Displacement in Ukraine, Building Solutions, the Phase 2 project. And Mr. Marushenko, the floor is yours. We know that you have been collaborating and kind of closely, engaged in these interventions together with DRC. So yeah, it will be interesting to hear about your work broadly, but also your perspectives on our core question of the session. Thank you very much. You have 10 minutes, 15 as well, because we still have lots of time. It seems two panelists are not still available. Thank you.
Hello, dear colleagues. It's a great pleasure to join the event, and I would like to express gratitude to the organizers. The project I represent is internal displacement in Ukraine, development of durable solution, phase 2, which is implemented within action plan for Ukraine between 2018 and 2022. So this is already the second phase of this project. Previously, we worked with IDPs beginning from 2016. Over this period, we had a special focus on the issues of reintegration of IDPs. That's a deep and complicated question. There was a big amount of research completed in this regard. So what have we done over the last years? First, we worked with Kharkiv Institute of Social Research, which, using our grant, assessed the needs of IDPs, and they developed a guide for the assessment of the needs of IDPs. This is a guide. It's available on our website. You can download it. Also, they have completed such assessment in the town of Izum, and it's also available. And there is a separate document as a part of this grant is the algorithm for forwarding of IDPs. It's a very important document because we need to know what to do with those IDPs. If we are collecting the information on their needs, there should be then some response to those needs. So in the continuation of this current focus, as a part of the project in 2020-2022, we have selected 5 pilots to be implemented in 5 communities. Those who expressed their desire to work with us, and they represent Dnipropetrovsk, Donetsk, Mykolaiv, Chernivtsi, and Odessa oblasts. So these communities will be implementing the tools, and we will be providing support in this regard. A separate focus is in cooperation with the Ministry of Social Policy. We have a request from this ministry, and we have the understanding that the informational database needs to be improved. And as for the preconditions for the improvement of the database and for the integration itself, the preconditions are listed in the strategy for the integration of IDPs and the action plans, which we had beginning from 2015 until 2020. And these are quite useful and comprehensive documents developed on the central level in order to accomplish the integration of IDPs. So there are other preconditions, such as the requirements of the law on IDPs, and also the decree according to which the monitoring of such categories of the population is performed. Of course, this legislation network and framework needs to be improved because the needs are being collected not comprehensively as of now. And also we need to provide opportunity to those people to directly inform about the needs they have in their personal documents. We heard from our today's speakers that people feel uncomfortable when staying for a long time in the social support departments, and this is quite understandable. So for the people who are able and willing to use digital tools, the ministry wants to provide such opportunity, and this is not a new idea. Some steps have been done in this regard before. So the ministry wants to implement the online cabinet for such people, And so the issue of monitoring and the introduction of the information and also having to stay in the social support department for a long time, it will be relieved by this step. So we are ready to support the ministry in this regard and to provide all kinds of support we have. So that's briefly my introduction about this subject. Thank you.
Rushenko, for your participation, for your contribution to this conference. We will be certainly continuing the collaboration with you over the next few months, together with the Ministry for Reintegration of Temporarily Occupied Territories. I am just told, and this is really a question to our technical support team, that there should be a representative from the Ministry of Digital Transformation available in our webinar room, Mr. Valeri Shtaba, if I accurately announce his last name. If you could please make sure that he can access the room, please. Yes, we see this on the screen. Mr. Shaba, we can hear well, we cannot hear you. However, we can see the image of your screen. The floor is yours if you can hear us.
Okay, I can hear.
Great, yes, we can hear you as well. So
okay,
please go ahead. I can actually summarize the question and the objective of this panel itself. So we have the representatives from different state and non-state institutions in this panel, and we are all trying to discuss, reflect, and find jointly the response to the following questions. What are the key prerequisites as well as the limitations for the implementation of the state monitoring of IDPs integration in Ukraine? And considering that your ministry is one of the major players in this endeavor, particularly with the DIA application, right, that we are hearing a lot from the Ministry for Reintegration, it would be really interesting to share a little bit more information about the application per se, as well as your perspective from the Ministry of Digital Transformation, how you see your role in this process, as well as the interaction with other line ministries, as well as the international community who has been on board in this exercise for a while now. Thank you, and the floor is yours.
Дякую за привітання.
Thank you for your welcoming word. Dear colleagues, I did not have a chance to get ready for this meeting, but I would like to point out that the Ministry of Digital Transformation right now wants to create some entry point for the IDPs in the digital space. For now, it only exists in the paper form, so we want to make it possible for the person to register as an IDP, to re-register their registration address, to request the support. So we support right now the project of the application of being able to receive the financial assistance, which IDPs have to do twice a year. Also, right now we work on the project with the pension fund. We have developed an experimental project, DIA signature, which is a wonderful thing, which is not only a protected cap, but it also confirms that it is actually the person who is signing. So the person is looking into the camera, the face of the person is being compared with the image from the demographic register, and this is a way the person can sign the document or to get authenticated for the use of online resources. So this is a tool that we are developing for people to be able to avoid physical contact with their social security departments. Also, we are developing the mechanism for those who need the IDP certificates, all the other institutions, for them to be able to check availability of this certificate without requiring this document from the person. So this certificate is already available in the DIA application. And so these are the main short tracks we are working on. And we are working together with the Migration Service, the Pension Fund, the State's Statistics Service, Ministry of Social Policy. As for the system of IDP integration monitoring, indeed, in the database, there is a set of data which is filled in for the first time when the person gets a certificate. There is no understanding of what to do with this data next. Of course, it is quite understandable that the person will have challenges with housing and then with integration, etc. So this is the issue to be solved by the line ministries, and we are assisting in the creation of modern ways of digital integration. Thank you.
Mr. Saba, for finding the time to join this conference and for sharing more information about this application. And we wish you best of luck in its not only implementation, but further development and extension. So it seems that we have already heard from all the panelists, and as far as I can notice from the technical support team, the representative from the Ministry of Social Policy unfortunately has not managed to join this panel. It would have been really important and interesting here the perspective from the Ministry of Social Policy. However, we are of course continuing this regular communication and coordination with multiple stakeholders to make sure that the process is really inclusive. Considering that we still have some time left before we close this session and conference, I have been just wondering, maybe the representatives from our forum, maybe Ms. Irina Kalupacha or maybe Anastasia, considering that you are really leading this process, maybe you do have some technical or questions to the panelists before, we go to the conclusions and kind of sum up of the conference. If you do have, because we have this let's say luxury of having the representatives of several institutions at the same time, so in a one forum. So if you do have some specific questions or would you like to express some opinions, please just let me know, and yeah, we can. Yes.
Thank you for giving me the floor. Currently, I do not have questions to the previous speakers, but I would like to point out that it was highly important to hear the views of different ministries and actors in this field. It was very important to hear from the Ministry of Digital Transformation. We understand that the IDP-related processes are being digitized right now. It simplifies the entire process, and it's a strategically important step because it contributes to the simplification of procedures and ensuring better
access to those procedures and to services for people in the non-government controlled areas, and this is even much more important than the simplification of access. So it is wonderful that we have in this digitalization strategy this mention of the internally displaced people and making sure that the processes are made acceptable and accessible for them, and many of them can use this one-click possibility in their smartphones. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Irina. Anastasia, yeah, you can proceed.
Thank you so much, all the panelists, for sharing your ideas and information on the processes that are happening right now. It is very important for us to work with international experts, and as I have mentioned, we are right now developing a guide for IDP integration, data collection and analysis. For now, we see different ways on how to collect data. We have different sources for data collection, and on our part, ideally, we would like to believe that here in Ukraine it is possible to use different multiple sources of data for IDP integration, and we believe that those digital solutions will become a reality in Ukraine, and we are ready to work together with all the stakeholders in the future. We see that there is a lot of room for collaboration with many stakeholders, and there are still issues to be discussed with the Ministry of Reintegration, the Ministry of Digitalization, the State Statistics Service, and we hope for fruitful cooperation.
Thank you very much, Irina, Anastasia, for your final remarks. And then maybe we can proceed with the, let's say, closing remarks. And I would like to give the floor to Mr. Bru Lemerle, the country director of Danish Refugee Council Ukraine office.
Thank you. A big thanks actually to all the panelists and the participants today. I've definitely become much more educated person after this conference. You know, the Deputy Minister in his intervention at the beginning, you know, stressed that the focus on long-term solutions for IDPs is an important priority. And I think we can definitely agree to that. And he also stressed that measuring and monitoring, I mean, measuring what integration means and where it stands over time, and which monitoring systems to use for that is important as well. So I think the first takeaway, you know, from this conference relates to the why a state monitoring strategy and mechanism for integration of IDPs is needed. Well, the obvious answer is to better inform policy making and programs towards the integration of IDPs. But I think one of the other elements that this conference highlighted is that there are also many flaws and challenges in what already exists today in terms of data being collected, in terms of how these different processes are coordinated. And the second element, you know, of answer to the why is, I mean, we also need a state, monitoring mechanism also to ensure that the strategy for integration of IDP is, you know, reviewed over time and recalibrated, or to make sure that the objectives of this strategy are readjusted. We also spend quite a lot of time discussing the how. I'm not a data specialist or a monitoring specialist, so will not venture into the technical details. I think our speakers spoke about it quite well. I will rather, come back to some of the recommendations that were drawn from the desk research, from the consultations that were held before this conference. I think one of the key takeaways I want to highlight from this, consultations, and all the speakers also spoke about it, is we need to agree also on why, on the purpose of the, monitoring systems and mechanisms. So it's obviously very different to have this mechanism just to know the number of IDPs, and it's, if you actually use this monitoring mechanism to actually act toward integration, it's a completely different story. I think another key element that was highlighted by the speakers is the importance of taking the perspective from the IDPs themselves. And there are many factors that influence the perception of integration. We talked about, the access to social payments, the access to housing, the possibility to come back to the place of origins or not, actually. But at the end of the day, it all comes down to, the feeling of belonging. And that was something that was also stressed quite strongly here. Another point is about, maybe the distrust or the doubt that IDPs themselves may have toward when it comes to collection of information or data, and that's something that has to be taken into consideration as well. So we had, many relevant examples from Serbia, from Georgia, from Kosovo, from Greece. I think we also had a lot of valuable inputs and insights from the speakers on the prerequisites and the challenges. But the final comment, I think, from my side will be that there is work ahead, definitely. Many questions were raised today. Many initiatives were mentioned. But it points out toward the need for coordination between all these actors and for action. So I hope that today's conference is just the first step, and it will be followed by other steps. So at the Danish Refugee Council, we will be there. We hope it will be the case for all of you here as well. And once again, I'd like to say thank you to all the participants, to Eka and her colleagues for the organization of this conference. And I hope you really enjoyed it. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Bru. And I think with this excellent summary and steps ahead, I think we can formally close this conference. And thanks again for everyone. Thank you to technical support team. Thank you to interpreters for making this hybrid, quite experimental let's say platform of the event available for us. We wish you best of luck. We will be certainly continuing moving ahead with this very interesting and also challenging journey. And we wish you all the best, and first of all, health, and best of luck in all your endeavors. Thank you very much for being with us today.